Chapter 2. Meet the Crew. As soon as Sibby uttered the words and the realization started to sink in, the boys realized that they had been foolish indeed. It had already been a long time they had been taking the money from the ATMs, and all of them knew that they were now too deep into things to back out. Right on the heels of that realization came another realization. How were they going to go about protecting themselves? All of them knew that the laws on hackers were stringent, and they could not expect any leniency from the authorities. In the case of hackers, the law did not distinguish between juvenile and adults. Everyone was tried as an equal. It did not matter that they were all only 16 years old. They would be viewed and convicted as adults. These thoughts sent a chill of blind panic down the spines of all four boys. They were at a loss at what they should say or what they could do. All four minds were racing to figure out a solution to their problem. Interspaced with thoughts of solutions were recriminations against their own stupidity. How had they just walked into such a dire situation, like a group of foolish children? They had been thinking themselves smart, but they were the stupidest people on the planet. Trying to get mixed up in hacking and thinking that they were among the elite just because someone else did the heavy lifting, and they got the cash without doing anything? How did they not think of the paradigm, that nothing in the world came for free? Had life not taught them this lesson again and again? How had they been callous enough to forget it so quickly? The answer became apparent when one looked at the life the four boys had lived. They all came from an impoverished background where they all lacked money enough to feed and clothe themselves. Obviously, at the prospect of unlimited wealth, each had willingly jumped at the chance. But at the cost of signing our lives away, thought Sibby savagely. Even though he had been the one who had suffered the most out of the four, he still took the blame on himself. He thought that he should have been more careful and should not have had fallen into the temptation of finding out more about his father. It had been a long time since he had been in contact with these people, and they had not given him anything more than what they had said in the first conversation. He thought that he should have turned away from them, or at least had not involved the other guys. He had made friends with each of them because they were all underdogs. No one betted on them. So Sibby did, and he was right to do so. He had earned their lifelong loyalty by just giving them a helping hand and sharing his fortune with them. But I never meant to share my misfortunes with them. The thought crossed his mind morosely. With that thought in his mind, Sibby looked up at the guys, who were still staring at him with horror in their eyes at the prospect of getting caught or being asked to do even more illegal things for an unknown entity. Looking at them intently, he said, "Here is what we're going to do. First, we're going to stop cashing out from the ATMs from now on. This amount should last us a long time if we spend it carefully and get part-time jobs. I know it will be difficult at first, but it is much better than getting into more debt with these people. The second thing we're going to do is deny any knowledge that you guys knew anything and put the blame squarely on me if anyone asks questions." Mark, Anthony, and Chris looked at him, and loyalty shone in their eyes, and was apparent in their vehement denial as well. "If one of us goes down, we all go down," Chris said to Sibby in a firm voice, and Anthony and Mark nodded along. Sibby was now in control of his temper and panic, and looked coolly at the three guys in front of him, and said in a sarcastic voice that was tinged with emotion as well, "And how are you going to be any help to me or yourself if you go down with me, huh? I need you to think with your mind rather than your hearts. Guys, we are in way over our heads, and any misstep is going to spell out death for us. So you do as I say and put the blame on me, so that you guys can stay on the outside and be of some help to me." The guys looked at him, and understanding the reasoning behind his words, they nodded their heads one by one. Sibby was a natural leader, and I was proud of him. He displayed the same qualities as his father, and I was sure that he was going to try his best to find us and beat us at our own game. The thing was that he was new to this arena, while we were the decade-old unbeaten champions. There was no one out there who could surpass our collective intellect. Sure, on our own we did not present much of a threat, but combined we were a force to be reckoned with. I was thinking all these thoughts while I looked at Sibby, standing in front of his friends through the micro camera that I had shot at the corner window from the apartment complex across the street. Even though Sibby had been vigilant, he was still not up to date on his tech. He did not know, for example, that there was a version of parabolic microphones out on the black market that was capable of listening to conversations through a soundproof glass and acoustic dampeners. He thought his security measures were impenetrable, and up to a point he was right. The reason I was able to bypass them was that my teacher had been his dad, and I was using Pete's contacts to get to the tech that would enable me to spy on his son and keep him safe. Let me just say, keeping Sibby safe was a full-time job. Although, to give credit where it is due, I must say that the kid knew his ropes. He was a natural at the arts of evasion. Even if I had not been protecting his back, the police would have had a hard time tracking him, even though he was looting ATMs willy-nilly. It was a relief to know that the boys would be taking a break from all the cash demands, for we were running low on favors. If they picked an older model of ATM, it was no problem for us, but the newer ones required us to seek assistance from Chpt, who was Pete's past connection in Russia. He was now in contact with our collective, which was dedicated to keeping Pete safe in prison, as well as protecting his son. Like the rest of us, Chpt, along with Lee Jun and Yosef, was in Pete's debt for taking all the heat for the scams that we've been running for well over 2 decades. The collective that I'm referring to includes the 4 of us. There's Richard, who was Pete's best friend as well as his college roommate. He came from a middle-class family, and his parents were very old. The responsibility of the house, therefore, fell to his older sister Julia, who used to drop in on him from time to time to urge him to study hard and get good grades. She did not like him goofing around with friends, and told him that the only thing she would pay for would be his college tuition and his accommodation. For the rest, he had to man up and take care of himself. I would not call her mean, but she was strict. She wanted her brother to grow up and make something of himself. Since she was a regular visitor to the dorm, we were all on good terms with her. All of us knew that she loved her brother very much, and no matter the tough love she gave Richard, we knew she would do anything for him. Next came Tosh, who was introduced to the group because of Richard. She was a self-learned developer and was a genius in C++, Python, and machine language. She was mixed Polynesian and drop-dead gorgeous. She met Richard in a computer science class, and from there, she met the rest of the team. On the merit of her mad skills, it was natural that she became an integral member of the team. Richard was also a good programmer, but he had learned everything from Pete, and so he did not bring anything new to the group. He just acted as the backup. Pete would explain the basics to him and he would take up the loops, while Pete worked on creating new logics and ultimately build the complex algorithms required to hack large infrastructures. That is where the genius of the team came in. Every member was a programmer, but their areas of interest were widespread. They took interest in different aspects of programming on computers. Next on the team was Sash. He was from Brooklyn, New York, and the smooth talker of the group. Even though he was a good programmer who could hold his own among a group of elite programmers, his skills lay in dealing with people. He was the gifted manipulator on the team. If we wanted to confuse someone, or understand their motives, or try to pull a fast one over someone, it was always Sash who would take the lead. Sash was a ladies' man, and they just fell over themselves trying to get him anything that would make him pay attention to them. It is a skill that we still find useful to this day. Sash is still very much the ladies' man, and it was Sash who went in when the first contact was required with Sibby and his grandmother. Anyways, the next member of the team was the one who was the most introverted out of them all, Logic. His real name is Larry, but he answered to Logic. He was the only child of loaded parents. He studied programming because he liked it. He was bored with his life and he coded to let off steam, and found that he was a natural when it came to ladder logic building. He was the SCADA PLC programmer of the group. He could program in ladder diagram or ladder logic PLC, programmable logic controller, Cobalt, Pascal, and Fortran. However, what he liked most of all was that the infrastructure systems were built 20 years ago and did not have security built into them, making them vulnerable to attacks. He was a big fan of Stuxnet. The theory behind is that the U.S. had a malicious computer worm that penetrated Iran's nuclear system and caused substantial damage. On the Iran internal monitor screens, it would show that everything was perfect, but the worm caused the fast-spinning nuclear centrifuges to damage themselves and malfunction. That destroyed their hopes of building nuclear systems. Larry was called Logic because he specialized in developing logic bomb codes. You could write them and set them to trigger on a future date. He was the one who did the blackout for Super Bowl 47. Pete was the cybersecurity guru. He was the one who taught the crew how to hack. The process included the reconnaissance phase, collecting the information, and then the execution after we had all the information. He set up the hacking lab with hacking tools like Kali Linux, Nessus, and Metasploit. He was the one who taught us how to scan networks for vulnerabilities. He taught us tricks that would help us get into buildings undetected, and he also taught us how to hack password using Cain and Abel, clone cards for physical access, like RFID ID badges, etc. It was Pete who assembled the team. As I said, he was the guru. He had been brought up by one of the world's leading programmers, and so it was only natural that Pete followed in his footsteps. Pete was a natural-born programmer ever since we can remember. He has been programming. According to him, he'd been programming since he was 7 years old. He and his older brother were taught by their dad, and since their mom left them when Pete was very young, his dad took both his sons under his wing and taught them the only thing he knew and loved. So it was inevitable that Pete turned out the way he did. I remember him saying that since he was a baby, he had been seeing code written on the boards that surrounded everything in his home. His dad had even converted the walls into whiteboards that he could write code on. So everywhere Pete moved in the house, he would see codes. His dad consulted for multiple software development companies like Microsoft, Google, and even built a secret software for a company in Tel Aviv, Israel. So Pete had the most experience in programming and hacking, which he gladly brought to the table when he got the team together. I have never seen Pete have any issues hacking into anything from ATMs to TV station property, to accessing databases of large companies which employed top-of-the-line security experts. He was a genius, and if by any chance he would encounter something that he could not hack into, which was very rare, he would just reach out to Arkady, codename Anarchy608, a Russian friend who he had known for years and had found him on the dark web, or to Li Jun, code Chpt, his Chinese counterpart who he had also met on the dark web. Pete's list of connections also included Yosef, an Israeli who was a savvy computer geek and had an older brother who was a former Unit 8200 member. This was a very famous unit in Israel. They called them Advanced Penetration Unit, or the Advanced Intelligence Unit. They went into volatile situations before anyone else and assessed it, and would further instruct the higher-ups on the course of action that would be best for the situation. So, in short, this team decided the course of the events that would make or break countries, and they were the ones pulling strings behind the scenes. That is how high Pete's connections went. Any problem we would run into, and almost always a phone call or a text later, Pete would have it resolved. The type of work we did, we were sure to run into trouble and amass a large number of haters. It is still because of Pete's connections that we are alive and kicking. If it had not been for his foresight, we would have been a bunch of college kids who would have gotten caught before we even started, and that would have been the end of us. In fact, that was exactly where we were all heading. Before Pete brought us together in a team and turned us into a family, who cared for each other and would do anything for the team. It was Pete who saw the potential in all of us and stuck his neck out for us time and time again, ultimately taking the fall for us and trusting us to take care of his child. This was the reason that the rest of us were going out of our way to keep Sibby safe. Truth be told, with the heat on all of us, it was hard enough taking care of Sibby, let alone look after his friends as well. At first, all of us were annoyed when he brought in Mark, but we learned to live with it. However, we were beyond exasperated when they widened the circle and brought in Anthony and Chris as well. It was getting harder and harder to keep Sibby safe. It was not that we resented looking after the kid. It was just that the situation was tense and the heat was still on us. We were still fugitives, and Pete was still being questioned as to our whereabouts. The only reason they were not putting a lot of pressure on him was that they had no proof that Pete was acting in conjunction with a group of people or by himself. Both scenarios were plausible, and Pete was sticking to his story that he was in it alone. So, we were trying to keep Sibby from including even more people. At first, we did not care about keeping his friends safe. But the way Sibby looked after them reminded all of us of the way Pete would look after us. The way Sibby behaved sometimes was quite like Pete. He would resemble him so much that all of us would get nostalgic for the time that was gone by now, and was likely never to return. The way Sibby had told his friends was almost the same words that Pete had used in the last conversation that we had had with him. He had told us to think with our minds and not our hearts, a sentiment that Sibby had just repeated to his friends turned family. I was certain that he would grow up to become a great person and an incredible visionary like his dad. Looking at the image of the 16-year-old boy in front of me, I was thinking that the time had come for me to put the rest of my plan into action. Still looking at the screen, I picked up my cell and typed, "Commencing Phase 2. Please ensure proper protocol." When I was done sending the text, I looked at it for a moment, thinking how these types of things had seemed ridiculous and dramatic to me when Pete had first implemented this system of communication in between team members. I had told him I did not like the James Bond things. It made me feel like I was acting in a ridiculous and overdramatic play. However, now it had become second nature to me. After all, It was the main reason that the rest of the team had not been caught yet. Please pick up the second book, Rise of the CEOs and We Are Back, from the Dark Cumulus series at your nearest bookstore or on Amazon.com.